This November, no matter the outcome, we will elect our 47th chief executive. But first, we're going to take a look back at how the presidents became president. This is your countdown to 47. Now to young Hickory, James K. Polk. Prior to becoming the 11th president, Polk began his career in politics in the Tennessee legislature. In 1825, Polk entered the U.S. House of Representatives as a Democrat, where he became a vocal supporter of President Andrew Jackson. 10 years on, Polk was elected to become the Speaker of the House. He held that post until he left Congress in 1839, when he was elected to be Tennessee's governor. In 1844, Polk was the leading candidate for vice president on the Democratic ticket, with former President Martin Van Buren expected to win the nomination. However, Van Buren's public opposition to Texas's annexation provided Polk with an opportunity. Polk openly called for Texas's annexation, as well as the full occupation of Oregon, establishing himself as the expansionist candidate. An elderly Andrew Jackson pushed for the nomination of any candidate who would fulfill America's manifest destiny. This apparent endorsement, as well as Polk's open support for expansionism and his pledge to only serve one term, was enough to secure him the nomination for president. Polk, now dubbed as Young Hickory by the press, appealed to the South with his push for Texas's annexation, and to the North with the idea of acquiring Oregon. His opponents, the Whigs, would mock young Hickory's apparent obscurity with the phrase, "Who is James K. Polk?" Well, they'd soon have their answer, as he went on to defeat Henry Clay in the election and become the 11th president of the United States. The original dark horse president soon went to work. Just 3 days before Polk took the reins, Congress passed a resolution offering to annex Texas, which Polk promptly signed. This put the U.S. closer to war with Mexico. President Polk, in his push to acquire the Oregon Territory, would also risk war with Great Britain. He sought to claim the territory up to the latitude of 5440, which was the southern border of Russian Alaska. In an effort to stave off yet another war with Great Britain, Polk agreed to the Treaty of Oregon in 1846, where the United States would acquire nearly all the territory south of the 49th parallel, from the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific Ocean. As tensions cooled along the northern border, they were just starting to heat up in the south. Polk, seeking to gain California, offered Mexico $20 million. They declined. The president sought to put pressure on Mexico by sending General Zachary Taylor to the disputed territory along the Rio Grande. The Mexicans, taking this as a sign of aggression, attacked Taylor's troops. This began the Mexican-American War. The war would last 2 years and reshape America, literally. The land gained by the end of the war would include what is now the states of California, Texas, New Mexico, Utah, Arizona, Nevada, as well as parts of Colorado and Wyoming. At war's end, the question of whether the newly acquired land would allow for the expansion of slavery only added to the already growing tensions between free and slave states. This set into motion a cascading set of events that culminated in the Civil War. Polk, satisfied with his one term in office, chose not to seek re-election in 1848. Young Hickory left office in 1849 in poor health, retiring to Tennessee, where he died 3 months later, the shortest post-presidency of any to ever hold the office. James K. Polk served as President of the United States from 1845 to 1849. I'm Eric George for Valley News Live, and this has been your countdown to 47.